AlliCat.
And I'm GareBear.
And you're watching
What in the World?
Garrett, I have a problem with our last episode.
What? What was wrong with it?
It wasn't controversial enough. I mean, you and I can have a big debate about geography, but most people out there don't.
All right then. Well, what would
Let's
you like?
talk about religion.
Yeah. Because if you think political world building is controversial, just wait until you try and tackle people's deep-seated spiritual beliefs. There's nothing quite like religion to inspire people's passions, both in real life and in fiction. It can be a huge asset to a world's mythos, and it can directly inform character motivations.
Still, we should probably narrow down what we're actually going to be talking about. So let's list some criteria. First thing, it has to be a religion that's actually established within the world of the narrative. Not just vague imagery or quotations with no other details, nor can it be just a passing reference. It needs to actually affect the characters and/or the plot.
Also, this isn't about looser forms of spirituality. For the purposes of this episode, the religions in question have to be established institutions of society with doctrine and order to give them definition. Interaction with spirits and a vague connection to the cosmos won't cut it.
And finally, no allegories. This is about religion in narrative, not narrative standing in for religion without any direct references.
So, if that's everything we're not talking about, then what are we talking about?
Well, let's start at the beginning. Real-world religions and their characteristics. There are some things that most will have in common. The first is pretty obvious: the belief in some sort of higher power.
The concepts of afterlife and good versus evil also usually play a role in religious orders.
What tends to vary are things like how much influence the religion has, its integration with other aspects of a society's culture, and its clerical hierarchy. If your religion has this, its duties can be anything from small-scale administrative work to large-scale rituals. And these rituals can be pretty elaborate, so fiction writers can get really creative with those.
Also, prophecies, which can be an expeditious way of directly involving a religion in a story's plot.
Despite any eternal truths that a religion may claim, religions do change over time like any other aspect of culture. Different interpretations of a scripture or a doctrine are bound to arise, and when that happens, you can either get a breaking off or else a slow religion-wide movement. It could also lead to something like a crusade if the differences are too great. Setting a story during the time of a religious crusade could be a great way to incite some conflict.
Do we get to see God? What's the actual representation of deific power in question?
Okay, hold up. What is this, Real-World Religion 101?
You're probably wondering why we're speaking in hypotheticals instead of using concrete examples, and there's a good reason for that.
It's because there aren't really a ton of concrete examples. See, unlike any other world-building element, anything from magic, technology, aliens, religion is complicated.
And we don't mean complicated to implement necessarily, just complicated in terms of the real-life cultural contexts. To decide to have it in the first place is often a matter of debate in and of itself.
Yeah. Much like politics, religion is a touchy subject. But unlike politics, it deals with something that's very, very personal, like a conviction or a soul.
Political beliefs generally have manifestos and orders that are established in the writings and philosophies of text, hard text. But religion is all of that, plus faith. And faith is both something that's very subjective and something that people who believe, they hold it very close to themselves. And there are very few creators out there who actively want to risk offending people by misrepresenting or criticizing those deep beliefs.
And that's for better or for worse. When storytellers leave religion out of their narrative, they sacrifice a lot of potential and can minimize what could be an interesting or powerful cultural statement.
Lastly, before we move on to actual examples, you probably don't see a lot of organized religions in fiction because even though religions exist worldwide, the notion of what religion even is or is supposed to be can vary.
People of different cultures have different views of religion, religious organization, and religious iconography. This can be very evident in anime. It's part of the reason why you see a lot of crosses in Neon Genesis Evangelion without much of the Christianity context. and why the Shinigami and Death Note don't translate as well when you try to explain them to an American viewer. Basically, different views on deities, religious structures, and religious customs make it so that not everything applies everywhere. And when you want your story to have as big of an audience as possible, sometimes it's just easier not to include it.
But when it is, we find that it's usually in one of two ways. Basically, what we mean by this is that the religious institution in question is generally a force for good, or it makes the world better, and that the deity is generally benign. This angle on religion generally involves the worship of something that is proven to the audience to actually exist.
Think something like James Cameron's Avatar, where the Na'vi's religion is directly tied to their respect for the environment. Even though there are no recorded scriptures, there's clearly a strong oral tradition and a community around the religion. The Na'vi belief in Awa gives them strength, and is even endorsed by the other good guys.
The digital universe of Tron is also a good example of this, though in a weirdly human-centric and syncretic way. The object of worship is any given human operating a computer. Flynn is regarded like a god within the grid. He and his devotees work to free the system from various evil programs that subjugate the system, and acolytes like Korra and Tron himself are rewarded for their faith in the users. Flynn in the second movie also apparently benefits from a conversion to Buddhism. Maybe.
On the flip side, you get religions that are obviously not the good guys. You see this a lot in animated comedies, where real-world religions are spoofed. But you can also get more serious criticisms.
With a few odd exceptions, Star Trek has again and again denounced the paranormal in general by giving it some kind of explanation. It's an alien, or it's a machine, or it's some kind of space phenomenon. Sometimes, even the protagonists have run-ins with less knowledgeable beings and have to refute themselves as gods. Even the most well-developed religion in Trek is centered on what amounts to aliens chilling out in a wormhole.
His Dark Materials has a solid presence of organized religion, though the church in that trilogy is far from right or good. In fact, the conflict surrounding the fictional church gets to the point where the protagonists have to go and literally kill off the world's god in order to make everything right again and get to their happy ending.
For a simplified version of an evil church, take Halo, where the whole conflict revolves around humanity's fight with the Covenant, a theocratic alien race led by those known as the Prophets. Their religion has the distinction of encompassing several worshipping species, but it's not something we humans would consider benign, probably because we want to live and not be on the raw end of a genocidal crusade.
Sometimes a work will be somewhat ambivalent on the topic of religion, even though it could take a more solid stance if it wanted to. Going back to animation, shows like Futurama do a lot of religious commentary both ways, through religions like robotology. Game of Thrones has multiple religions, some of which seem to bestow magical powers on the faithful, yet that oddly doesn't seem to be much of a deciding factor when it comes to the number of followers.
There does seem to be some underlying commentary about real-life religions, or at least aspects of them, like monotheism versus polytheism, pluralistic versus proselytizing, etc. One thing that's necessary to consider about fictional religion is that it should have some sort of physical origin. There's a reason why the Dothraki in the Song of Ice and Fire worship horse gods and not dolphins.
In Avatar, the Na'vi's ability to interact with their environment and the way in which they do so is critical to the way they view their goddess and their religion. Think of how the religion would look if they couldn't use their tails, dreads, whatever, to attach to things like other animals and trees.
Or what if they could actually connect to metallic objects and inorganic compounds like unobtainium? Perhaps then their mythos would gain some kind of evil, mechanical god figure.
These are the types of questions that you have to ask if you're going to make religions for your own worlds. So, with that in mind, let's move on to the do's and don'ts of religion in world building.
Do. Be careful. Especially if you're inadvertently commenting on an actual religion. And before you say, but I'm making this up, know that just by being a religion, it's going to invite comparison to real-life religions that people actually believe in. You don't need to agree with these people, and it's certainly okay to write in a way that that's clear, but if you're not respectful, you're going to have problems, and a smaller audience.
Don't be afraid. Just because someone out there might get offended by your idea for a chili dog, owl, eyeball, hybrid goddess doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. As long as you're not being malicious and that goddess is there for a reason, feel free to build up anything you want about who she is and, more importantly, how she's worshipped.
Do. Consider how much weight you're giving your made-up religious system. If you must criticize or validate a real-life religion with it, then for all that is good and holy, research the real-life religion it's based on. The more important to your story the religion is, the more research should be done. And the last thing you want to do is offend somebody because you misrepresented what they actually believed because you were uninformed.
Don't put organized religions in your story just to preach about how great a real religion is or to criticize it. For one, people get really easily offended. For two, it gets very tiring very fast because it's super obvious that your work is just supposed to be a vessel for your exaltation or your criticism. As a world builder, have a little more respect for your plot and your characters than that.
In other words, Papa, don't preach, or you'll be in trouble deep.
Do. If you decide to include it, make religion something that affects your characters and has a solid origin story based on who they are and how they live. Remember, they live here!
You know how deeply religion affects people and events in real life. Apply it to what you create.
And whether that's going to affect your characters in a big way, it should probably affect them, and not just you as the author.
The world serves the story like the story serves the audience.
And if it's looking like it's going to be the other way around, you might want to go back to the drawing board.
Or the altar, as it were. Thank you for watching, guys. It was great that you saw us again. We're very happy for it. If this is your first time seeing us, be sure to check out our other videos.
And then leave a comment about religion and which one you like best in a world, or the one that you find the most laughable.
You do realize the huge can of worms we've just opened into the comments section.
Yup, and proud of it. After you do that, make sure to subscribe and follow us on social media to see what in the world we're talking about next. Until then, stay curious.
And stay creative.